ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Capital G here, talking about something a little different. And a big thanks to Father Nature over at the Dungeons and Cardboard Discord group, who is a huge fan of Flesh and Blood. For those who are not familiar with it, a more recent collectible card game in the vein of Magic. Quite a few gameplay differences, of course. But the game has definitely been picking up more and more momentum over the past couple years. And so he bought a deck for me from this website, Flesh and Blood Starter Deck, so FABStarterDecks.com. Let's use the hashtag not sponsored because, well, I'm not sponsored. But I did want to talk about this particular website because I do now own a Flesh and Blood deck. It's Blitz style, I believe, which is not quite, well, Classic Constructed I think is 60 cards or more, and I'm just shy of that for my deck. Or actually, I think I'm exactly 60. I don't know if the hero character, because every player gets a hero character, and you can have some equipment to go with that hero. Those start outside your deck, and then, of course, the rest of your deck are all your actions, reactions, etc. So yeah, you can actually get some pretty decent decks to start playing the game with for pretty low price. These are all US dollar prices. So, for example, the Azila deck, 16 United States dollars. The one that I have is a Viserai deck. That was the one that Father Nature gifted me from this website. He's not affiliated with the website either. He simply, bought a lot of stuff from them. And the website actually got back to him, and they do have a relationship of some sort. I'm not sure of the specifics, so I won't go into that. But yeah, cool website where if you want to get started on Flesh and Blood and you're not sure how to start, I mean, you can grab one or two decks, or even they even have these sort of dual packs. They're about $50 to $60 for these dual packs, but it's everything you need for two players, both Blitz style decks, and packs to upgrade them to Classic Constructed. So yeah, that's where this pile of cards is coming from. So a Viserai Rune Blood deck. For those who are not familiar with the game, I'm not really gonna go in depth on the rules, but I guess just to quickly cover the basis, you have the young hero side where you start with less health. You start with a certain insight. That's the number of cards you have in hand. So Blitz style, it's a lower life total, whereas Classic Constructed will use the adult side, as it were, which is a higher life total. The abilities are the same regardless. So as long as the equipment fits for your character, you can run it. For example, the Nebula Blade is on the bottom. It says sword, two hands, which means if this is a two-handed sword, you can't have another sword or a shield or anything like that to go with it, because, well, you're holding this with both hands. So, some RPG tropes thrown in there. And in this case, that's a headpiece, which is why I can have this item. It's marked as a headpiece. So, obviously, one headpiece, you can't have like 2 or 3 different headpieces. And the rest of the deck is action cards. They can be reactions that are played out of turn. My deck does not have that, but I will show you what my deck is and what it's about. So Viserai Rune Blood, again, it says here it's called a Rune Blade hero. So it likes to use what are called the Rune Chant tokens, which the back of one of these is a Rune Chant. So some of the cards in your some of the action cards that can be in your deck are attack actions, or you can choose to attack with your weapon, and these basically go off and they'll shoot at your opponent. The idea of the game is, of course, to reduce your opponent's health to 0. So it's pretty straightforward. And the idea is you're going to make a bunch of these rune chant auras. They'll sit and play until you attack. When you do, they're going to blast your opponent alongside whatever card you use to attack your opponent with. He makes it a bit easier to generate those tokens. So if you play what's called a Rune Blade action that is not an attack, and then you play another Runeblade action, you get a Runechant token. So that's one way to build them up. The Nebula Blade gives you a repeatable source of attack. It's fairly weak at only 1 attack power, which is what this arrowhead indicates. And it also costs 2 mana, which is what these red symbols represent, is mana. I'll explain how you get mana here in just a moment. But if ever you hit your opponent with this attack, you get a Runechant token. They may choose not to block because it's such a weak attack, but they may block and try to, prevent you from getting those tokens. So this is just sort of a repeatable way of attacking, and this is a good way to get some action cards back from your graveyard or discard pile, as it were, by spending a mana to blow this up completely, and you can get some action cards back on top. It's also got something called Arcane Barrier. So if any source is marked as arcane, and that includes actually the Runechant tokens. If someone else is playing Runechant tokens and you've got some extra mana, you can use this to block arcane attacks. If you don't need it, you can always, like I said, spend the 1, destroy this completely, and get some of your own action cards back. So what are the action cards and how do they work? I guess the first example I'm going to show you is a card called Rune Flash. They come in different colors. Even though it's the same card, they come in different color frames to indicate sort of different power levels of the card. And that makes deck building very interesting. Because, for example, over the course of the game, if you want to generate mana, you quote-unquote pitch a card. It's basically discarded from your hand. It's going to end up on the bottom of your deck at the end of the turn. So cards that you pitch for mana, and they can pitch for 1, 2, or 3 mana. It's all consistent with the color of the frame. So a red frame card is always pitching for 1 mana, at least amongst the cards that I have. The yellows, of course, pitch for 2, and blue ones pitch for 3. But the more mana a card can generate for you on a turn, the weaker the power of the card if you play it normally. So, for example, this is an attack card, but the one that gives you the most mana, the blue ones, also has the weakest base attack value. In this case, a 2 on the blue one, a 3 on the yellow, and a 4 on the red. How much does a card cost to cast? You just look at the top corner. In this case, it's asking for 3 mana. So if you pitch another card or any combination of cards to give you at least 3 mana, you'll be able to play your action. You get 1 action per turn, unless it says go again. So if you start your turn, you discard a card for some mana, and you use it to play this card. It has go again, so you can at that point play a second action. Otherwise, you only normally get 1 action per turn. You can, however, take one of your cards and tuck it away for a later turn. You can only have 1 card tucked away at a time this way. So that's a fun way to kind of manage your hand. You'll also notice that there's like shields in the corner here. So whenever you're being attacked, you can actually discard one of these cards to reduce the attack against you by the value on the card. Pretty neat stuff. So what do the actions do itself? So Rune Flash, of course, is mainly for attacking. The more of those Runechant tokens that I showed you that you have in play, the cheaper it is. So the cost can actually be reduced. And of course, the go again action means you can, play another action card. So I think these were a useful card in this particular deck. Perhaps one of the most useful is the Read the Ruins card, because these can generate anywhere from 1 to 3 Runechant tokens at no mana cost. They're very weak on defense. They don't attack at all. But again, the lower the mana value, the stronger the card. So these red ones, they only give you 1 mana if you pitch them, but if you play them, you get 3 of those Runechant tokens. That's really, really effective. And again, these cards have 0 cost to them. But notice that there's no go again, which means if you play a Read the Ruins on your turn, that's the last action you're taking for that turn. Still, very, very useful card. I quite like this one in the deck. Next card is the Spellblade Strike. These cost 1 mana. There's no cost reduction on these. Boom. But not only can they generate an attack for you, but they also generate a rune chant token. These rune chant tokens happen after the fact, so it's basically you basically attack your opponent, and you get a rune chant token for later. So these are useful in that sense, and it's a very straightforward card. Amplify the Arcanite is perhaps the most powerful of the cards, the attack cards in the deck. This deck, by the way, comes with 3 copies of each card. So, for example, there's 3 of these blue Arcanites, 3 of these yellow Arcanites, 3 of the red ones in the deck that I've got. Again, notice how the blue one's only got an attack value of 4, whereas the red one, yeah, although it would generate less mana for you if you pitch it, if you do play the card as an attack, it's a much heavier hit. Is this the strongest deck in the game? Not by any means. Obviously, the gentleman, like I said, the gentleman takes extra cards that he's got and turns them into a basic deck for us. So most of these are fairly common, fairly cheap to get. There's only 2 more cards to show you. It's actually very easy to show off one of these decks because in this instance, all the cards have the same name. So we're not like looking for 100 different named cards, but you do have to pay attention to the color of the board so you have a better understanding of the effect. So Drawn to the Dark Dimension. It's another attack card, which is cheaper to play depending on the number of rune chant tokens you control, and it also draws you a card. Now, something I haven't found them super useful because interesting caveat to the game is that at the end of your turn, you always draw back up to your insight. So, as I've mentioned before, I have an insight of 4, which means I always draw back up to a hand of 4 cards at the end of my turn. And obviously my resources can be wasted, like I may have to discard cards on my opponent's turn to block an attack, for example. So that's where you kind of have to be careful. But that's where these come in, because this not only lets you have an attack, but it draws you back a card that you might use for something else. That being said, I'm not so sure I like this card in the deck on the overall. I don't think the attacks are very strong. And drawing back that extra card, unless you have other quote-unquote attack reactions, which this deck does not have. There are what are called attack reactions, which basically make your attacks a little more buff and don't cost any further actions. But without them, I don't really see a use for the draw card in this deck. So this is actually a weaker addition to the deck on the overall. But they're there to get us started anyways. And the last card they had included in the deck, it's called Bloodspill Invocation. Sorry, I'm working upside down here, so it's a little tricky to place the cards in front of the camera. But there we are. And with the Bloodspill Invocation, these actually sit in play until either you get damaged or your opponent gets damaged in combat. And if I successfully damage my opponent in combat, these will actually blow up and get me 1, 2, or 3 rune chant tokens. So it's a good way to build up rune chant tokens. And these are the only non-attack actions in the deck with Go Again. So these actually synergize very well with Viserai in that sense. And they're also fairly cheap to play, only 1 mana to play them. So the reason I say they synergize with Viserai is because Viserai specifically looks for you to play a non-attack action and then play, any other Runeblade action. So again, great synergy here in that sense, because you can play this and then you can take another Runeblade action or maybe make an attack and get some of those tokens. So yeah, that is the deck that they sent me. Obviously there are tons of upgrades available. I haven't put the time needed to upgrade this in just yet. Mainly because, well, one collectible card game is expensive enough as is. 2 card games, I've made that mistake before. You don't necessarily want to play 2 games at the same time and really go all in on 2 games at the same time. I did make that mistake before when I was when Legend of the Five Rings was a little more popular. I used to love that game. Played it in the early 2000s. The game got discontinued, I want to say 8 or 9 years ago. It was sold from AG held the rights. They sold it to Fantasy Flight, and they've since released it as not just as a tabletop RPG, which that already had existed. AG was also releasing Legend of the Five Rings as a tabletop game, as well as a card game. The card game itself, Fantasy Flight has done a couple of living card game sets with it, but that's pretty much been it. The game has not really come back under Fantasy Flight's watch, which is unfortunate because it's a really good, although very complex game. This, however, on the other hand, is a lot less complicated. It's really, really tricky at first to, kind of manage your hand. Like, somebody attacks you, do you pitch cards to block, or do you hold on to them so you can, get your 3 mana and turn it into a big attack of your own? It's really tricky to balance. So, but that's the challenge of the game. It's you never have no resources unless you choose to, pitch your whole hand in defense against a huge attack. So, very interesting game, very interesting stuff in that sense. Like I said, I'll probably tune this up a little bit. Might get a second deck at some point just so you can, actually play this in Flesh and Blood. I probably won't go too much further than that. That's just me. Again, I've put so much time and energy into Magic, and also have a huge board game collection as well. So I'm personally not going to go too much further than that with this game. But for anyone who's curious about it, it is definitely worth a try. It is definitely a really good game. And like I said, join the Discord group. Again, it's called Dungeons and Cardboard. The link is in the description as always. And hit up Father Nature. He's the one who's really, really pushing the game on our group and having a lot of success with that. That's all from me for now. Radio silence for a little bit. I'm going to be on a bit of an away mission, doing some work out in Thunder Bay, Ontario. So I won't be recording any videos while I'm out there, but I will have my EDH decks with me, and I may have my Flesh and Blood deck with me if there's anyone who plays it out there. And I might get some webcam games in using my cell phone. I don't have a laptop right now, so can't really produce any videos, won't have the time, but I get to go away for a little while. So with that in mind, I've got to go get packing. I'll be back in a few weeks. Crimson Vow spoilers have just started. Magic Crimson Vow spoilers have just started. Therefore, well, get ready for a bloody good time of a wedding. Bye for now.